Hello, welcome back to my channel. So today I want to do a video all about the ESTJ personality type, an overview of their functions, their strengths, and their weaknesses. What can they really tap into to make themselves more effective and maximize their strengths and their range and their prospect and satisfaction as well. I really want to dive into what makes ESTJs so special. I think there's so much flavoring within that fourth function. I think there's so much maturity in the second function and just a general respect of the third function. You know, all these different puzzle pieces that make up the ESTJ. So if you haven't heard of cognitive functions before, these are them. These are the 8 cognitive functions that Carl Jung coined in 1921, and it makes Myers-Briggs so much more interesting. So I want to get into the order. For the ESTJ, this is the order of their cognitive functions. So this is loosely speaking in order of importance in your personality. So to clarify this a little bit more, the functions in green are potential strengths, but again, this is in order of importance. So just because 5 and 6 are potential strengths, I wouldn't necessarily focus on those first. I have kind of a chronological order that I'll describe on what you should focus on first. But the green ones are your potential strengths. Maybe they're not a strength right now. Maybe you're not in an environment that really encourages these. But if you were to lean into these, if you're an ESTJ, these have the capacity to be strengths. The functions in red are probable weaknesses. A little bit of a caveat with 3 and 4, because as you get older, you know, like 50s, 60s, 70s, especially the older you get, those can actually really become strengths. But when you're younger, there's every likelihood that those are weaknesses, and they probably are. So to break this up a little further, the top 4 functions are the ones you're conscious of and the ones that you value. So you're aware of these in yourself, and you value these in yourself and in others. So like your third and fourth function, even if you don't use those that much and they're not really a strength, maybe you choose a partner who has those characteristics because you still value those things maybe in others. The bottom 4 functions, you don't value them, you're not conscious of them, maybe they bother you, for example. So that kind of breaks this down even a little bit further. So because your top 4 functions are conscious and valued, there's so much meat to unpack there. So in this video, I'm really going to focus on those top 4 functions because loosely speaking, it's descending in order of importance. Your first function is an overused strength. It's who you feel like you are. It's the water you swim in. The vast majority of the time, it's great that you use it so much, but it's one of those things that if you have a hammer, you think everything is a nail. And it might not be good to use it 100% of the time. It's good to use it lots of the time, but not 100%. Your second function is an underused strength. So it's something that you naturally have a talent in, but maybe you've neglected it and maybe you haven't built the skill in it and put in the work to do it. But this is a really big area of growth to really increase the range of your personality. Your third function is an overused weakness. This is something that people tend to go to a lot, maybe in conflict or if they're feeling prideful or insecure. It's kind of like a defense mechanism function, and so it can be overused, and it's really good to kind of get out of this third function. And your fourth function tends to be an underused weakness. It's an area where you maybe feel very insecure. It's the opposite of who you feel like you are, so you don't use it that much. But a sprinkling in of it can be really beneficial for the personality. So these are quotes from Carl Jung, John Beebe, Myers-Briggs, these bullet points about when we zoom into the top 4 functions, what are some characteristics in that place. So if this is something that you're interested in, you can pause it and read this, but I'm not going to necessarily go over it because I have another video where I went into this in depth. So getting into your first cognitive function, extroverted thinking, or abbreviated TE. So extroverted thinking, let me break down these words. Evert means to turn, extra means outward. So it's turning to what's happening outwardly. And Carl Jung actually got the word extrovert, he's the one who coined the word. He got the word from Binet, who called it externospection. And externospection, spect means to watch over. So it's watching over what's happening outwardly. You're tuning outward to the world. So there's lots of things happening in the world. You know, there's people, there's senses, there's logistics, all types of things. But for extroverted thinking, this function, the things that they're tuned into outwardly are the thought, kind of logical criteria. So a lot of times this is like logistics. This could be leading a group of people. This could be, you know, goals and external metrics for how well a business is doing. Efficiency is kind of an external logical metric. So these are all things that I associate with extroverted thinking. So because this is an extroverted function, this gives you access to the world and action taking. That's what extroversion gives you access to, which is so important. And so since you're an extrovert, that's predominantly what you have access to, is this world and action taking. And your first function is who you feel like you are. It's the water you swim in. This is the function that's been with you throughout most of your life. It's kind of understood that your first function is developed, then at some point later on, maybe teens and 20s, your second function gets developed, maybe your 30s, your third function, maybe your 40s, your fourth function. Those time frames are all just approximations based on your experiences. But the idea is that this is kind of loosely in order in which these have been developed. So this has been the function that's been with you the longest amount of time. So even as a child, maybe you were called bossy, because this is a lot about leadership and organizing people. So I just did a series on each of these cognitive functions, and I was looking at what words Carl Jung and Vanderhoop, Myers and Briggs, what words were used most often. And the word most often used with extroverted thinking was systems, or systematic purpose, or thought systems. That word came up many times. Another theme that came up was it's about outcomes. What's your outcome? What's your objective? What's your goal? There was a quote that they stake an aim and put a lot of systematic effort to achieving it on schedule. They care about results and efficiency. So there's a lot about external outcomes. Another theme was this ambition, this desire to lead. Ambitious, organizer, want to be an authority. They want to have executive power, the ability to make decisions. So there's a lot of, there's a strong business flavor with extroverted thinking. I've got someone in a blazer here. We have a business meeting, and there's SMART goals. There's definitely a strong business flavor. And there were quotes in there about they have this business-like outlook. There's a huge amount of determination and persistence with extroverted thinking. They want to root out anything that is not in line with the cause. They stake this aim and they're going to achieve it on schedule, and there's a huge amount of determination and persistence, and they will sacrifice many things in pursuit of this one goal. So there's a huge amount of tenacity that is so respectable from TE DOMs. There are quotes about how they never stagnate, they will get it done, like they will make sure that this thing gets done. And one thing that I think is not necessarily always associated with stereotype of extroverted thinking is this moral optimization, but there were definitely many quotes from Carl Jung and Vanderhoop about wanting moral optimization. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, it's very similar to this Enneagram 1. Liking to be in this moral perfection or kind of this standard. And so a moral optimization is something that I think is a huge part of extroverted thinking. So this function gives you access to the world and action taking, which is so important. And your second function gives you access to yourself and to reflection. That's what introversion gives you access to. So it's so important to have both of those things. You don't need to be balanced 50-50. We need extroverts and introverts. But you don't want to be so far on the one end of the spectrum, because if you only have access to the world, you lose access to yourself. And that can be so hard to lose yourself in the toils of the world. That's a quote from Carl Jung. So your second function is introverted sensing. So introvert means to turn inward. So it's just what's going on in your brain. You're turning inward, you're reflecting what's going on. And it's not necessarily about being alone. It's not necessarily about alone time. You can be in a group of people and be reflecting within yourself and processing what's happening inwardly. So it's to turn inward, to watch what's happening inwardly. He got the word introvert from introspection, spect again, meaning to watch over. So to turn inward and watch over what's happening inwardly. And what you're paying attention to, there's a lot of things happening inwardly. There's feelings, your thoughts, all these things. It's paying attention to the senses. So it's an internal processing of the senses. And sensing can be a synonym for experiences, like things that you've sensed are things that you've experienced. So it's a processing of the senses. So that could be, am I too warm? Am I too hot? Is this shirt itchy? Do I like this brand of coffee? There can be a lot of a particular honing and parsing with the senses. But it's also an internal parsing of experiences in the way of coming back through your memories. For example, an internal processing of your senses and experiences is like coming back through your memories and processing those, and how have those things built this chapter, built on this chapter, built on this chapter, which creates this book, which is your life, and how have your experiences formed you. And also, it's not just your own experiences, but Carl Jung talks about this long-standing timeline, processing kind of all of mankind's experiences and their history, and really a reverence for where we've came from and what things have stood the test of time. There's a sense of timelessness, like not just wanting fads, but really what's going to have lasting value for human needs. So one word that I use for introverted sensing is timeless, not affected by fads, as lasting value. Carl Jung talks about it as it sees things as a million-year-old consciousness might see them. So I think of like the sun rises and sets every day. And if the sun was looking at this particular thing, how would the sun think about this thing, with its long-standing history? Would it think that this thing is a fad and is just going to go by the wayside, or would it think that this thing has long-standing value? And it sees things through a lens of age-old subjective experiences. So there's old-fashioned is a word that gets used a lot. Traditional is a word. Conservative perhaps is a word, not necessarily in the political sense, but just in the general sense. Other quotes about the sense impression develops into the depth of the meaningful. Remembrance. And then I'll describe this funeral mentality in a second. But it's this meaning with experiences, a meaning with this remembrance. Talking fondly about, like, when I was a kid, I really looked up to my older brother, and he did this thing, and that really impacted me, so now I'm doing that thing. And it's just a reverence for, like, the family tree and the lineage. It could be a very mundane event, but for some reason that particular thing really marked you, and really you attach a lot of meaning to it, and it's very subjective what one introverted sensor attaches meaning to and what another one does. One thing that I wanted to mention was this funeral mentality. I've known so many introverted sensors who have really responded well to the question, think to your funeral, and what do you want people to say about you in your funeral? What do you want people to look back on your life, and what do you want them to say about you? And it's a question that delves into the meaning, and it does it from a past-looking perspective. It puts you in the perspective of all these people who are looking back and processing the past of your life, and what do you want people to say about you? And it gets the individual out of, the minutia of the everyday life, but it gets you back into introverted sensing and saying, what really matters? When it comes to my life, what has timeless value in my life? What do I want people to say about me at my funeral? So I thought that's something I find it so interesting that I've heard ISTJs and ESTJs really value this question as a way to process. And so I think it's so good for ESTJs to really meditate on that question. Introverted sensing is very calm, temperate, reserved, and gentle. I've got pictures here of people reading. It's very cozy, drinking coffee, maybe they're journaling, but there's so much calm, temperate reserve. And I think ESTJs probably don't describe themselves in this way a lot of times. And I'll get to this third function and why that might be, because a lot of times your second function is neglected. But I think it's so good to have, this function gives you some calm, out of the rat race and, this hustle and bustle. It's a function that gives you like, okay, I'm gonna have my routine. Every morning I wake up and have my coffee, I do my journaling, I do my reading, some routine. And that's so good for ESTJs to tap into. Routine, familiar, traditional, and very good with details and very thorough. So this is a function that really adds so much complexity to ESTJs. Carl Jung talks about that when individuals are in their first function only, it's kind of one-dimensional, it's kind of flat. So when you're like in your youth and like you're a teenager, maybe you're just in that first function and people perceive you to be kind of bossy, but there's not really much else going for you. Then eventually you develop this second function, and Carl Jung talks about how it adds a complexity to the character that's not so one-dimensional. So this allows you access to the self and to reflection. This is the function that John Beebe calls the parent function. So he calls the second function the parent and the third function the child. And this second function is really how you can parent others. It's how you can impact others. It's how you parent yourself. And what he means by this is parents will set expectations for the child or set expectations for the self. There's a maturity there. And so getting into the second function allows you to parent that third function, but it also allows you to impact others because your first function is such a natural strength, like you're just a natural at it. And sometimes it's hard to teach people something that you're a natural at, you're just so good at it. But your second function, you had the talent for it, but you had to earn the skill. So what I recommend people do is they isolate the second function and they work on it for an extended amount of time, like 5 years, let's say, because, things happen and you're motivated and less motivated and there's kind of this up and down. But when you do it for 5 years, you really have the opportunity to really get all of the value out of that function. And once you've put in the work to develop the skill in this function, then you can help others in that way. Once you process your experiences, learn how to get routine, learn how to lean into what's timeless and what has long-standing value, then you can teach people how to do that thing. And you can lean into what will have long-standing value in your life. Not lost in the everyday minutia and things that are temporary, but things that in your life have long-standing value and how to prioritize the things that really matter. And you can teach people how to do that as well. What things have long-standing value. Maybe it's family has long-standing value. Maybe it's God or something like that. It's different for each individual, but what are the things that have long-standing value? And this function helps you process what things have long-standing value and what things don't, and slowly pare down and say no more often instead of saying yes more often, and you're saying no to the things that don't have long-standing value, and you start saying yes to the things that do have long-standing value. So now getting into the third function, your third function is extroverted intuition, or abbreviated NE. So extroverted, so it's another extroverted function, so it's turning outward and trying to realize some certain things externally. And the things that it's trying to put into the world are the intuitions, are the things that do not exist. So introvert is the opposite of extrovert, and sensing is the opposite of intuition. So if sensing are the things that you have experienced, the opposite of that are things that you have not experienced, or those are the intuitions. That could be an idea, a creative enterprise. It's something that's not in the world, but you want to innovate or invent, and you want to put that into the world. So because this function is extroverted and you're an extrovert, there can be an overindulgence of coming into this function. It's very comfortable. It's something that you like to be in extroversion. So there's a tendency to be only in the first and third function and to skip over that second function and neglect it. But the issue is that because your second and third function are direct opposites, introvert's the opposite of extrovert, sensing's the opposite of intuition, they're direct opposites, kind of like the North Pole and the South Pole. You have to pick which one you want to be in. You cannot be at the North Pole and the South Pole at the same time. So if you choose to be in that third function, you're choosing to not be in your second function, which is unfortunate because that's where you can have so much impact, access to reflection and access to the self. So by saying yes to your third function, which is in the red zone, it's not a strength, it's a weakness, you're saying no to this thing that's in the green zone. So this third function in kind of the underused, overused, strength, weakness matrix, this is an overused weakness. So I have here some things that extroverted intuition can give you, but then I have an arrow for how it can get twisted now that it's down here in this red zone. So I have some things up in the top left there. I've got like travel or this business ideation. That's something that is absolutely positive. That's a positive thing that extroverted intuition gives you. Trying new hobbies, trying new things, and that's a great use of extroverted intuition. But there's a tendency to use it in bad ways. The third function is called the child function by John Beebe, and he describes it as primitive, cowardly. Some people describe it as like a bratty teenager. It's got a lot of ego, an inflated ego. And there's a lot of good things that teenagers bring to the world. There's a lot of idealism, and so those things are represented by that top left corner. But also in this metaphor of it being like a bratty teenager, it does really lean into kind of the prideful know-it-all type things. And so it's really important to be in your second function, which is the parent, the more mature function. And it can set proper expectations for the third function, keep it in check. No, third function, we're going to use you in these appropriate ways, but we're not going to use you in these inappropriate ways. So the number one word for extroverted intuition used by Carl Jung was possibilities in the plural form, and it was used many, many times. One thing that extroverted intuition is good at, it has a nose for possibilities, and really good at the promotion of new enterprises, new innovations or businesses. But how that can manifest in an ESTJ, if they're too much in TE looped with NE, is that can just be workaholism. TE already has this business-like outlook, and you combine that with this promotion of enterprises. If you remove the second function, which is all about that reflection, it can be so much workaholism, and that's represented by these pictures on the right. The thing about extroverted intuition is it's very strong in initiative, and we've seen with TE that they already have a lot of determination and persistence, never stagnates, and so this leads to a double dose of just being too busy, saying yes to too many things, juggling too many things. This picture on the bottom right with this guy that's got these like octopus hands, it's possibilities become things that we've said yes to too much, and just juggling too much, juggling too many plates, and it feels like they're all coming crashing down at some point. One thing with extroverted intuition is it's very clever. It's seeing the possibilities, like for a joke, for example. Also good at problem solving. But sometimes this can be used as, if it's used in a time of defense or if it's used in an argument, it can be used like in sarcasm, a bullying wit, so witty but kind of in a degrading way. Extroverted intuition is very tireless, and extroverted thinking as well. We got this double dose of determination and tireless, and so there's a lot of exhaustion involved. So extroverted intuition, it's not thinking about the body at all. It's the opposite of introverted sensing. So your second function, introverted sensing, it's thinking about, oh, I'm feeling really tired, or my muscles are feeling tired, and right away noticing a change in the body's sensory experiences because it's turning inward and processing how the body feels. And so if you skip over that, sometimes you'll just go and go and go, and you don't realize that all this exhaustion is catching up to you. One thing about extroverted intuition, a bad quality about extroverted intuition, is it can be very evasive. It's seeing all the possibilities, all the exit routes, and so it can find it, and so it's very good at being evasive. That's what I have this at the bottom left, this kind of snaking image around the obstacles. It sees all the possibilities, and it's good at snaking out. So one thing that ESTJs can do is they can avoid consequences, and they do it by controlling the conversation. So TE is very good at controlling a conversation. Both TE and FE are in different ways. And so if sometimes they can hold others to a high standard, but they don't hold themselves to the high standard by being evasive. And they might not think about, the consequence of this on the long term are not going to be good. This action, this evasiveness, isn't of long-standing value. And the last one is they can shrink from intimate relationships. That's a bad quality about NE in general, or kind of a distractible nature. Sometimes if ESTJs are looped in their first and third function, when they're talking to you, it can feel like, they have 384 things to do on their to-do list today, and I'm stop 126, and it doesn't feel like there's a real connection there sometimes. They're typically very jovial in my experience, but there's still this sense of rushing. It doesn't feel like there's ever a resting. So since your second and third function are direct opposites, and you have to pick which one to be in at any given moment, it would be best to pick that second function, the parent function, the more mature function, and allow it to parent that third function. Set expectations for it. I'm going to use you, extroverted intuition, for optimism, for hobbies, for brainstorming, for new ideas for the business, for traveling and trying new things and trying new foods. But I'm not going to use you in the way that puts me on the hamster wheel and has me being too busy, or has me talking too much and not listening enough, or being evasive, but really sitting down and really enjoying my relationships. Introverted sensors have a strong value for family. That's what your second function gives you, for family, relationships, because it understands that that's what has long-standing value. So your final function is introverted feeling. And this is the direct opposite of who you feel like you are. Your first function and fourth functions are complete opposites. So this is a strongly underused weakness. The reason it's a weakness is because it's underused, because you feel like you're the first function, you don't feel like you're this fourth function at all. And so it tends to be underutilized a lot of the time. So if your first function is extroverted, your fourth function is introverted. So you're turning inward and processing. And the opposite of thinking is feeling. So it's turning inward and processing how you feel about things. What are your convictions? What are your morals? What are your values? What are your feelings? Negative feelings even. There's a strong emphasis with introverted feeling on processing negative feelings and emotions. So I think a lot of ESTJs might see some of these graphics and they're like, whoa, this is the opposite of who I feel like I am. I don't know if I'm this thing. But inside, there is a little FI inside ESTJs. Your first function, I didn't touch on it much, but it's an overused strength. So it's who you feel like you are. It's great that you use it much of the time, but it's not the tool for every job. So all the types have this belief, my first function and my first function only will get me what my first function wants. So like efficiency and efficiency only will get me this system that I want, or systems and systems only will get me this well-running system and this well-oiled machine. But sometimes that's actually what imprisons you. You think that if I just pursue efficiency and pursue efficiency and pursue these goals, then I'll meet these goals. But once you reach one goal, then it's going to be replaced by another goal. And it's just really on this hamster wheel. And it actually creates this goal prison, or this outcome objective prison, or this business prison. It actually doesn't create the freedom and the set it and forget it nature that I think a lot of ESTJs want. They want to create this system and it runs on its own, and then they can kind of step back. But it never really gets to that point. And then efficiency and efficiency only, sometimes your own emotions are catching up to you, and then you have this exhaustion and it's catching up to you, and then you can't have the well-oiled machine. And so it creates this prison if you say my first function and my first function only will get me what my first function wants. When in reality, it's all of the functions used in appropriate ways will get you what your first function wants. If you've got these 4 functions in your toolbox, in particular the first 2, it's better to use all the tools at your disposal instead of just insisting that the square peg will fit in the round hole. So one thing that gets thrown around with extroverted thinking a lot, even in Carl Jung's writings, it can be kind of like a tyrant. I talk about even especially in the home circle, being very tyrannical over their family, their children, their spouse perhaps, maybe over their subordinates at work. It can be tyrannical. And so that's just something that TE tends to go to. And so what FI sprinkles in is it's no desire to change others and seeking fault in the self. So introverted feeling understands, like, I have my own morals, I've got my own values, my own thoughts, they've got their own values and thoughts, and I don't need to try to control them. We're all our own people, we all have a good head on our shoulders, we can all do our own parsing of things. And so it's got no desire to change others, and it seeks fault in the self. Part of the issue with TE is it's got this moral optimization, and so many of the time it wants to kind of morally optimize everyone else. But introverted feeling says, no, I need to morally optimize myself and seek fault in myself first. And it's my responsibility to take care of my own morals and my own behavior. It's other people's responsibility to take care of their own morals. And it takes some pressure off. It's not so much needing to pull the puppet strings of other people, but saying, I'll just seek the fault in myself. Extroverted thinking can have a desire to impress or be respected. An introverted feeling brings in more authenticity, and Carlene talks about how they have no desire to impress. You know what? I'll just be myself. It doesn't matter. I don't have to be the head of everything all the time. I can just sit back and let other people speak. And I'll just sit here and I'll do me. What can happen is, what a lot of times happens with the fourth function is it's completely absent much of the time, a huge amount of time, and all of a sudden there's a spike of the fourth function that's very intense, and then you go back to using it not at all. And that oscillation can create kind of some extremes. So one thing that can happen is with ESTJs, they don't process their feelings, and then boom, they use an infantile processing of their feelings. So that could be an outburst of anger. It's kind of like a tantrum. It's a very childish use of processing feelings. And they have this huge outburst of anger, and then they're back to not thinking about feelings. And so it can really be an issue when they're not thinking about feelings. So one thing that I've heard people talk about is an emotional hygiene routine. So just like how you shower regularly, and it's a general upkeep, you're never done with it. You have to keep washing the dishes, you have to keep doing laundry, you have to keep showering. These things just never end. Similar to that, your feelings just never end. So having a daily hygiene routine where you journal, you can do it in a TE way. You can create some system for your journaling. There's this book, I think it's called The Therapy Journal, and it's meant to prepare you for therapy, but I think it would actually just be very good in general, especially for ESTJs, because it's in introverted sensing. It's looking back at what happened today and what are the things that maybe would be important to talk about with a therapist. And even if you didn't go to a therapist, you could just think of what types of things, were important in the emotional realm. And it's also processing introverted feelings. So I think it's a good way to lean into your second and fourth functions a little bit more. And that way there's not these huge outbursts. What you want is not this flat line and huge spike, but just raise it a little so that you're sprinkling in a little bit more FI so that it's just more calm, because it kind of wears on relationships when there's anger outbursts. Embracing the depths of feeling. I think this is one of the last functions to develop. So this is something that maybe you start leaning into in your 40s. It depends on level of development, and it's every likelihood that it's a weakness up until that point. But just embracing the depths of feeling. There's quotes about introverted feeling kind of embracing misery within the self, or, how is this really making me feel? And that really, when you get into understanding your feelings, it can really help, this business or the system or whatever thing that you're in, it can really help those things run a lot more smoothly, because a lot of the breakdown for ESTJs a lot of the breakdown for ESTJs in the systems that they're building and with their coworkers comes back to their feelings. And they don't realize it. A lot of people don't realize what's happening in their fourth function, but a lot of times the problems are actually coming from there. So embracing idealism, love, justice. I call this function kind of like the hippie function. It's all, peace, love, justice, and it's very hands-off toward other people. Just embracing kind of this hippie mentality. So my recommendation is people work on their second function for about 5 years. They isolate it, really work on it for a long time. And then after that, if they want something else to work on, they work on their fourth function for a couple years. Just work on sprinkling it in. You're not trying to become an introverted feeler, because you are not an F or an I type. You're an ESTJ. But sprinkling it in so that you can actually get more of what you want. Your fourth function whispers at your life purpose. It's not your entire life purpose, but it kind of whispers and can give hints in that direction. And one thing that I think people don't know about TE users is they can be very sensitive to feedback. So if someone in the organization gives negative feedback, they really are wanting it to run appropriately. And I think that TE DOMs will put on this kind of hard exterior, but they take in feedback. Removing that hard exterior is something that this introverted feeling will give you. Allowing yourself to take off the armor and reveal this sensitive part of yourself who might be a little sensitive to criticism, who might be, who has these deep feelings in there that they've kind of protected and hard-walled off this whole time. But sprinkling in more the sensitive side. So instead of showing emotions in just the outburst way, showing your sensitivity. I think there have been a few times where ESTJs have let me into their sensitivity, where they've cried in front of me. And this is something that I really value in ESTJs. It shows the person. It really bonds me to them. If they want me to be loyal to their organization, this is what makes me loyal to their organization. When they show their sensitive side, when they show their feelings, it makes me understand this is where their vision is going. This is why they want to do the things that they're doing. And that is what really makes me a loyal subordinate to ESTJs. Great systems that I very much respect. Being TE second, I very much respect their systems and their organization and things like that. But interestingly enough, what I respect the most about them is when they've showed their sensitive side. And I've heard that you don't know someone fully until you know their fourth function. Gradually maybe you're introduced to one of their top extroverted functions, maybe their first function, second function, third function, but you don't really know someone until you've seen their fourth function. And that's what I feel like has made me so loyal to ESTJs when I'm a part of their organization. That's when I feel like I really know them. I've peeked inside the armor. One thing that ESTJs can learn is that you can influence so much more by showing your weakness than by putting up a facade of strength. And that's not the advice I have for all types. There's certain types that maybe need to do the opposite and stand on their own 2 feet a little bit more. But for ESTJs in particular, showing their weakness is what really I think can move the needle. It can be something that can be sprinkled in that really can make the organization and relationships effective. So that's my video on ESTJs. I have a lot of playlists linked in the description box. So if you'd like to know all the videos that I have that are relevant to ESTJs, I'll have the ESTJ playlist link down below, as well as all the deep dives on these cognitive functions. I'll have a cognitive functions playlist link below if you want deep dives into each of these functions. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. Bye.